Today, what I want to talk to you guys about is the domain age versus the freshness of the content. The domain age, as we've already come to know, is the date that the domain was first indexed. So when Google originally found that domain, that's the domain age. So if Google found your domain in 2012, then your domain is aged to 2012. If you registered it in 2010, it doesn't matter as long as it was indexed in 2012. Now, there's another factor that's important, which I would like you to understand as part of kind of the fundamental understanding of SEO, and that is the freshness of the content. How new is the content? How much of the content is changing on the website? How updated is it? How many links are coming into that content? How much time are people spending on the website as opposed to the time they were spending on it last year or the last few months, and so on and so forth. There are numerous freshness signals that come in to Google. So we need to take this stuff into account, and you have to kind of develop an understanding of what the freshness means and how it affects your website. So let's talk about the freshness of the content. Google is scoring your content for freshness. Freshness is a signal that's important in some searches and not all. For example, recent events and hot topics do have freshness signals, so Google will look for fresh content, recent content, regularly recurring events, and then frequent updates. So, best SLR cameras, for example. Now, we don't know the specifics about freshness scoring from Google, as in the exact algorithm impacts. But we can glean some information from patents that exist out there. Now, Moz has a great article about this and talking all about freshness, and I'd like to go through it and kind of give you guys a better understanding of what that means and the impact that it's going to have on your score. So freshness, similar to the domain age, is freshness by the inception. So freshness, when Google first found that content, when did they find it? Did they find it in 2012, 2013, 2015? Was it last month, last year, 2 years ago? Now, this will degrade over time. Freshness is a good thing for some searches, and it doesn't matter so much for other searches, especially if there are strong authority signals. So if lots of people are linking to a document that's continually grabbing more links, Google can see that as an important piece of content, and the freshness won't matter as much. So freshness by inception date is important, from fresh content to stale content, depending on the search, what matters more. Google obviously can determine that. Now, there's also document changes. How much is a document changing, and how much is that influencing freshness? Now, if there are small changes to a document, it's not that big of an influence on freshness. But if there are large changes to the document, then, if the main text is changing, you're updating something, for example, you described how to do something a year ago, and, that's no longer as valid, and you're updating a big portion of that text, and that's a large change. So that does signal some freshness. Next one would be, the rate of document change, how often. That's going to impact the freshness. Are you changing the document, one time a year? Are you changing the document every month to reflect something? They give the example of the New York Times homepage. Of course, that's changing a lot. So Google's algorithms have been developed to understand, when a document is changing and, the importance of those changes. Freshness is also influenced by new page creation. So, if you're continuously developing fresh content, that's a very good thing. They state here that, some SEOs insist you should have 20 to 30% new pages to your site every year, which I think is definitely a good rule of thumb. If you're adding very small amounts of content, then there's less of a freshness signal there. If you're constantly adding content, for example, if you're blogging and you're blogging every day, you're blogging once or twice a week, that's a pretty good thing. But if you're just blogging, once every 3 months or once every 6 months, freshness definitely goes down. So that's something to keep in mind. So if you are running a site, it's going to be better for you to add more content on an ongoing basis, and of course, not just any content, but focus on forging value. So it has to be pretty good content. You have to, focus on ensuring that it's high quality, unique, well researched. Then they talk about changes to important content matter more. So, into important areas of content. So if, navigation or comments or something like that are changing, it's not as important as the main body of the text. So that's pretty obvious. Rate of new link growth signals freshness. So if a web page is increasing in its link growth, that could signal more relevance to search engines. For example, if lots of people start linking to your website because some event is approaching, they give the example of getting married, then that can signal freshness because there's a lot of activity going on. Google knows that when the engagement goes up, i.e., lots of people are spending more time on content, or they're adding comments, or they're sharing more links, then freshness is definitely boosted. So then they talk about links from fresh sites that pass fresh value. So a link from a site that is constantly updated might have a better impact than a link from a site that isn't updated very much, that has stale content versus fresh content. So that's something to keep in mind. When you're in the link building phase, you definitely want to try to get some links from fresh content rather than stale content sites. Changes in anchor text signals may devalue links. This is a pretty important one because this has some impact on what we're going to discuss subsequent to this, which is purchasing age domains. What happens is, let's say you do purchase a domain. They give the example about automobiles, but it could be about anything. And then you change the format to something else. The old links that exist out there on the internet could be devalued, and it could actually work against you. So the age might shift. So the inception date might no longer become valid. So when you're looking into the age domain stuff, that's pretty important because there's going to be a lot of links that exist out there to content that might no longer be relevant. So that's why when we talk about purchasing an age domain, which we'll discuss after this, we have to purchase an age domain that's within the same historical context. So if you don't want to kind of suffer those demotions and relevancy signals, then you have to go after an age domain that has historical content that's in line with whatever you're producing. And we can research the historical content by using the Wayback Machine. And we'll discuss that. The Wayback Machine, we talked a little bit about it, is how you can kind of look back at content from years or months past and see what the pages looked like. Sometimes doesn't work perfectly, but for the most part, you can get a good understanding of what existed on that website. And that's really, really important when we're talking about purchasing an age domain, because that's a huge relevancy signal. So you could actually, be in a worse position if you purchase an age domain that has a lot of links and it's completely different historical content than to what you're purchasing. So keep that in mind moving forward. Then they also talk about, the user behavior, which would indicate the freshness. They give the example of a bus schedule from, 2009, whatever, 2014, 2015, doesn't matter. If it's an old bus schedule, Google knows that it's fresh if people are spending more time on the page. If they're spending 2 minutes on the page versus just 15 seconds. And of course, if they're more engaged in that content, not just if they're spending a lot more time there, but if they're engaging in that content, they're sharing it or they're commenting on it, those are also freshness signals. Now, finally, it's the older documents can still win certain searches. Google has a patent which will take the average of the ages for the most popular SERP results, and it will determine whether or not a particular search is impacted that much by age or not. So, you'll notice that for some searches that you perform on Google, you'll find older documents that could be at, around even 10 years old, ranking at number 1 or number 2. But they're ranking high because they've developed a lot of authority. A lot of people are linking to it. It still matters a lot. So that's pretty important. So keep the freshness in mind, because it's going to be important as far as, you know, your work going forward. You know, you definitely want to concern yourself with the age of your domain, but you also want to concern yourself with the freshness of content. So, you know, in SEO, you have to be active. It's not something where, you know, you can do the work one time and you're done. You know, it's a constant thing, an ongoing thing, but, you know, if you really master it and you really understand what's happening, you can outsource some work, but, you know, you definitely have to be very hands-on in the beginning and take a very active role. So that's the freshness of content versus the domain age.